So okay, let's start it then. Uh, so now we come to the this energy conserved. Like of course we are treating the energy conserved deviation formulation, and now look at the boundary conditions like, which we had defined in the previous class also. So we defined this adiabatic boundary, the specular condition where the scattering was exactly at theta angle. And in the diffusive condition, the particle after scattering with the wall could go randomly in any direction. So both of these conditions remain exactly same, except now we are going to apply it to the deviational particles. So nothing changes. Isothermal boundary conditions also remains pretty much same. So it does not change much, the isothermal boundary condition. So what we had described, like the isothermal boundary condition, like we would treat it as a black body. So the isothermal boundary at some temperature, boundary temperature TB. So whatever incident phonons are coming towards it, they would get absorbed. So the incident phonons are going to get absorbed. So while the boundary itself, like the boundary would emit some new phonons from this distribution corresponding to TB. That's what we said last time. But in this case now, what would change is like since we're taking the deviational particle, so we have to subtract this T equilibrium, the equilibrium temperature distribution. So that's what we are going to do. So the equation we got last time was for the flux was 1 over 4 density of states, group velocity, h bar omega, and that was our function f at temperature TV. But now we have to subtract this equilibrium distribution from it. So we subtract this equilibrium distribution to get our new flux from the boundary. So basically the boundary conditions, the adiabatic or isothermal, like implementation is pretty much same, except now we are applying it to deviational particles. So we have to only make just this change in the isothermal boundary, and adiabatic boundary remains pretty much same. Okay, so we hadn't talked about this periodic boundary condition before. So let's talk about how we are going to apply the periodic boundary. So before even doing that, let's talk about where the periodic boundary condition could be useful. So let's say we have a structure like which is made up of, let's say, this type of geometry, and this geometry is repeated throughout the domain. So one thing we could do, like the geometry which is like same throughout, we could take a representative cell out of it, and all of them we could say like, okay, these could be through periodicity. We could get back to the remaining cells. So now, how to make like this formulation periodic? Like how do we treat? Like how do we apply the boundary conditions, periodic boundary conditions on the ends? So that's not a trivial problem at all, and it took a while in even in literature to figure out those. So here the repeated object, as you could see, is there are two of these like within a cell, like two rectangular pieces within the one kind of a cell, and we are going to pick one of this representative cell, and let's say we would apply now the periodic flux boundary conditions onto the two walls. So these two walls we have to apply the periodic boundary condition. So if we treat it normally, like in the deviational, without deviational formulation, like so we treat it in a deviational. So there is a F1 positive, like on the right hand side of the left wall. So let's call it left wall. Let's call it right wall, or let's just call it number 1 or 2. So F1 positive just right of that, like the distribution function. F2 negative is just left of the right wall. F2 positive right of the right wall, and F1 negative is here. So now, as you could see, uh, F2 positive, because of the periodicity, like it has to somehow be related to the F1 negative. No, sorry, F2 positive has to be related to the F1 positive, and F1 negative has to be related to the F2 negative. So if we write it in a, so if we write this in a non-deviational formulation, so what we are saying is this F1 positive minus equilibrium distribution at T1 wall. So whatever the distribution at just right of this wall is, this F1 positive, and if we subtract the equilibrium distribution from the, like basically the distribution from the wall at temperature T1, it would be exactly same as this F2 positive minus T2, like at T2 temperature equilibrium. Okay, why does it come? So why? So like, let's look at this periodic condition. Let's take three atom. So let's consider this is our unit cell, and this cell is repeated in now in all dimensions. So as you could see, like whatever the right of this thing is, like because this entire cell is going to be repeated here. So whatever is right to that, basically this atom is going to be exactly same as this atom, because it's a periodicity. Like this thing is getting repeated again and again, and that's what exactly we're saying here. Whatever the flux here is, like F2 positive, and we have to subtract this equilibrium at T1, T2 temperature of the right wall. That flux has to be, because this part is going to be exactly similar to this part, and this part is F1 positive minus F equilibrium of T1. That's exactly what we had written there, and it comes from the this periodic condition. So F1 positive minus Ft1 equilibrium, it has to be same as F2 positive, F2 equilibrium. And in the same way, we could write for the negative term. So this F1 negative minus Ft1 equilibrium, it has to be this same. So these two has to be exactly same. F2 negative minus Ft2 equilibrium. So are you getting this part, like how we have written in the non-divisional form so far, these equations for the periodic boundary condition? So we are applying periodic flux condition because there is a gradient. So we can't apply the periodicity in temperature because temperature is not going to be same, but we could apply this flux condition. So is it clear to everyone?
No, sir, little bit.
So confused here?
Yes, sir.
So which part you're confused writing? Like you are confused in writing this part?
Non-deviational form that you are writing here.
Yeah, it's not clear yet.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's again go back to the simple form. So let's say something is here, and let's say there is A here, B here, C here, D, E, F. So let's say these letters are there. This is our cell.
Okay.
And now this cell is going to be repeated again and again throughout. This is our periodic cell. This arrangement is going to be repeated throughout. So again, we would get A, B, C, D, E, F, right?
Mm-hmm.
And same way again, we would repeat in all directions. So basically this cell is repeated. So what I mean to say, whatever is here, this part is exactly same as what is here, right? Because it's
Right.
periodic. It's periodic. There is no difference whatsoever. So that's
Yes.
what we're trying to write it with, is the distribution. So whatever is here, the distribution here is this right boundary, we called it 2, left we call it 1. So whatever is there at F2 plus, just right outside this boundary, it has to be exactly same as whatever is here, right? Right of first boundary, because it's going to be repeated.
Yes.
So F1 positive, but we have to subtract this. Wall temperatures are different. The temperature of the walls are not same. We are applying in the flux, the boundary condition T1 and T2. So we have to subtract f of equilibrium at T1 and sorry, T2 here, and F1 f of T1 of equilibrium here. And the second part we had written, so we compared the value here with this value. So this value was F2 negative, this was F1 negative, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we wrote the other equation. So
Yes.
F1. So is it clear now?
Right, right.
Okay, so we have written this periodic boundary conditions in the non-deviational form. So in the deviational form, then we have to subtract the equilibrium distribution, whatever within this, whatever equilibrium, T equilibrium we have assumed, we would subtract that part. So h bar omega. So what we have done to go from energy deviation formulation and energy conserved formulation. So first of all, we have multiplied everything by h bar omega. Second, what we have done is to go for the deviation formation. We have subtracted this F equilibrium, T equilibrium part from the both sides. Okay, so we subtract, we did it for both the equations. We changed it for both the equations. And h bar omega f1 positive, we could call it so h bar omega f1 positive, and if we subtract this t equilibrium distribution, we could call it just a deviational particle e1 d plus minus this e of t1 equilibrium, and same thing on the right hand side. So basically ed2 positive is, so e d positive is simply h bar omega f2 positive minus f of equilibrium t equilibrium. So basically we have to subtract this equilibrium part to get the deviational distribution. So that's what ed2 positive is. And the remaining term is h bar omega f equilibrium t2. So that becomes e equilibrium t2. So basically now we have got our periodic boundary conditions in the form of a deviational particle. Is this clear, going from this step to this step to this step?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes.
So this is pretty straightforward actually. So, okay. So how we would calculate the flux now? We have already applied these conditions. Like, so now to convert these equations to our flux. So what we do is like Q, we would take our deviational particles. Previously, we were just taking our h bar omega, the energy term. We would multiplying by the Vg, and there was we have to sum over all the space, like if you remember. So that would be cos theta, sin theta, d theta, d phi. So if you don't know how to get this, like, so this is simple. Like if we have a sphere, so if this is a polar angle theta, and if this is angle psi, so if you take a small particle at, so this is a sine theta, like this length, if the unit length is there, so this length would be sine theta because we projected here. Then sine theta, like small change in d phi or psi, so let's call it phi. So this is small volume, and we could change the same d theta, small d theta change we could do. And then Vg, so we would get this sine theta, d phi term. And this cos theta term comes from like Vg dot n cap, because we had to take flux parallel to the, like along the perpendicular to the boundary. So Vg and the cos theta factor comes from there. And there was h bar omega term before, but now we have taken the deviational particle. And 4 pi terms come from the solid angle. So we are doing the same thing. So to calculate our flux, what we have done is, so let's say the hot boundary. So the left boundary we are also calling the hot boundary. And this one we would call, let's say, cold boundary. So at the hot boundary, like, so we have taken this term E1D positive, and we have multiplied to get the flux. We have multiplied by the d omega by 4 pi Vg cos theta, sin theta, d phi. So basically we have to sum over everything. And this term has to be now equal to, we are taking this term on the right hand side. So there is a right hand side, there is a term ed2. So we could write ED2 positive d omega by 4 pi Vg cos theta, again the same thing. So basically the particle crossing the right boundary. And if you take this to the right hand side, it becomes E equilibrium T1 but with the positive sign. So basically T1 is with positive sign, T2 is negative sign, times again the same thing. So what we are essentially doing here, so let's say the particle is emitted from the cold boundary. So if the particle is emitting from this boundary, it's entering this boundary. So that's what we are doing. Like particle, if it is entering this boundary one, but it's coming through boundary this one. So we have simply inserted the particle here because this domain is same as this part. So we have inserted the particle, but we also know there is a temperature difference here. So this wall is at T2, this one is at T1. So we have to take care of that distribution. So we have to generate these new particles through this distribution, T1 minus T distribution. So previously, like if there was like no periodic conditions, like if it was let's say everything was same, like if it's everything was uniform, then we could simply insert the particle if there was no temperature difference. But now since there is a temperature difference, we have to subtract like or this T1 minus T2, like equilibrium distribution of those, and we have to generate the particles following this distribution. Are you following this? What we are doing here?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sir, one doubt is there.
Right.
Whether conservation of mass, I think conservation of mass is always conserved. No? Continuity question is
Yeah, that we never touch, right?
like from one boundary it is entering, another boundary it is going out, and it is also
No,
generation
phonons are
something.
massless. Like so, the particles we're treating, they are massless particles.
Okay, so we are not bothered about
Mass.
continuity.
No, we are not bothered. So we are worried about these. Like let's say if it's a periodic condition, we are worried about that. Like and whatever distribution they follow. Like mass is not a problem for us.
Okay.
These particles are massless particles. Okay. So now we could verify. So like in the last class, I think this problem is not so trivial even to visualize. So what you could do to verify this algorithm now, like it is really working. We could take again a one-dimensional system. So one-dimensional system is given like this, like and the length is about 3000 nanometer. So you have to tell me what kind of solution you would get actually. In the left end, at t equal to 0, like immediately after t equal to 0, we set it to 303 Kelvin. And this one we set it to, so the wall temperature becomes, so I think we set it to 301.5 and 298.5 Kelvin. So we set it to that temperature. So it's a, imagine this is a ballistic condition. So the walls are sufficiently close. So assume 3 micron is not much of a distance because our mean free path assume it to be much larger, like of that or some millimeter or so, like you would assume that. So how the temperature would change now using this deviational particle? So we could add always the equilibrium distribution. So equilibrium distribution, we could assume it to be 300 Kelvin. So once you solve for this problem in time, so what you get, this might seem little bit counterintuitive. So at t equal to 65 picosecond, like of course entire system won't know what the boundary temperature is because it would take some finite time for wavefront to travel. So the heat has only reached till this part. It has known what the temperature is. So it would reach the boundary temperature, or So maybe the temperature was actually 303 because it's written. So the boundary temperature was 303 and 297. So within 65 picosecond, it would reach here. So if we increase the time, let's say to 162.5 picosecond, now the entire system actually has seen the effect of what temperature is at the boundary. So it's a ballistic condition. So eventually what would happen, the temperature would start to approach down. It would start coming back down and it would start approaching like some constant value. Eventually it would come very close to 300 temperature. So there is an analytical solution to this problem, which is given in this paper. If you look it up, it's given in this paper. And the solution, you get it from the Monte Carlo simulation. Like it's exactly same. Basically, this solid line you are seeing, it's a theoretical result. Basically, by explicitly solving this equation for one dimension, you get this result. And these markers are this variance reduced simulation. And as you could see now, even the small temperature difference, our error is not much compared to theoretical. Basically, the markers are, if I remove everything, markers are quite overlapping with the theoretical solution. So this way, like in this paper, they verified the algorithm, like actually this deviational formulation works and it is quite precise, like error is quite low. So the deviation, standard deviation, like or the statistical uncertainty is really, really quite low.
Sir, in the last slide,
Right.
At t is equal to 162 picosecond,
Right.
the trend is slightly different. Means it is understood that at t is equal to 65 and 30 nanosecond, okay, it is fine. But at real one, it is something different type of pattern we are getting. So is there any reason?
So actually, it would directly come from that equation, how the wave front is traveling.
Okay.
So it would directly, you could arrive at this result directly from there. So it's a 1D problem. You take a ballistic system, you would arrive at this solution. So basically here, the middle part has not seen the boundary effect yet.
No, sir, I am talking about t is equal to 162.5 picosecond.
Right, like I know, like, so you're talking about this red curve, right?
Yeah.
So you're worried about these slopes.
Yeah, slope, right.
So they would directly come from the solution. Even in like if you solve it analytically, this would come like that.
Okay.
And eventually it would go down to 300 Kelvin or so. Like eventually it would
Okay.
approach that 300 Kelvin. Okay, so there is another problem like they tried in that paper. So in that problem, they solved it through the periodic condition. So what was the problem was? So there is a small thickness like this. There is a object in a, like basically they were calling silicon slab of certain thickness D, and this D was not much, and the temperature gradient was applied like applied in this direction. So if temperature gradient is applied in this direction, the domain could be quite large in this direction, basically in y direction. So you could approximate it as a like a periodic system where you take a small portion of it. Basically, you take a small portion of it and you just treat it. So now we are looking at only this top part. So this top part is here. So we are only looking at the small portion of it for periodicity, and there is some temperature gradient applied here. So basically, if center temperature T0, so it would be T0 plus delta T, T0 minus delta T. So we have applied now the periodic conditions on the sides. So one change in this problem was like in this thickness, these boundaries were not specularly reflective. So these boundaries were diffusely reflective. So basically, these boundaries could also like pose some resistance to the flow of heat. And they solved this problem. Again, you could solve it analytically also, and you could solve it through the simulation as well. So now what they're doing is they are plotting the flux along this direction, along this thickness d. So this is our 0, this is our, let's say, d, which is 100 nanometers, 0 and 1, and they're plotting flux along that direction. So of course the flux would be maximum along in the center. And if you look at the Monte Carlo solution versus the theoretical result, again for the heat flux it matches quite well. So basically this divisional algorithm works quite well. So I want you to draw your attention to the precision we are able to get compared to the in the last class when we were comparing the solutions, like there was some error. But now look at the precision we are able to get in the present examples. Like it's quite astounding. Like this algorithm works quite well. So basically just going from uh, normal Boltzmann transport equation to the energy conserved and the deviational formulation, like we are able to get quite accurate results with the theoretical results. Again, these problems and their solution are discussed in this paper, so you could go and read in more detail. Okay, so we keep saying this deviational formulation actually reduces the error. So there has to be proof for that. Again, in that paper, they showed quite convincingly. Like indeed, the deviation goes down. The statistical uncertainty remains pretty much constant in variance reduced. And if we do not take variance reduced formulation, it keeps increasing. So what we are looking at now on the x-axis is delta T over T. So basically, delta T over T is you could think of it as like if we applied 303 and 297. So delta T is 6 Kelvin. T you could assume uniform like 6 by 300. So that's like a delta T. And we are looking at sigma over delta T here. Like sigma is the uncertainty. So whatever solution we are predicting, let's say our solution comes out some linear curve. So let's say the solution at this point, like what it should be like. So what is the uncertainty in this solution? That sigma, the uncertainty is this solution divided by whatever the delta T was. So if you look at the variance reduced formulation, so in the variance reduced formulation, this curve remains roughly flat. So no matter how small we go, as you're seeing, as we are more closer to the equilibrium distribution, the like better we get. So if we keep delta T over T keep reducing, so let's say the delta T becomes 300.1, 299.9. So delta T is just 0.2 divided by 300. So we keep reducing this delta T over T. So variance reduced would keep the same amount of uncertainty in the solution. So anytime it's predicting this sigma over delta T to remain constant. But if you take a non-variance reduced formulation, the uncertainty would keep going up. Like as delta T over T reduces, as you could think also, so if the overall system temperature is, let's say, so let's say you are about to get this some final solution like that, and average temperature is also like quite close to it. You are sampling for this small difference. You are sampling this entire domain, which is not going to be useful. So your error would keep piling up. So as soon as you go to the smaller and smaller limit, the variance non-variance reduce, like it would give you much larger uncertainty in the solution compared to the variance reduce. So that's why the this variance reduced formulation is such a better thing to do, like when the temperature difference is really small. Even if it's large, it would still work well, but then they would start become comparable. As you could see, if delta T over T is roughly same of order, then the both formulation have about the same uncertainty. As we keep increasing delta T over T, so then the both would approach the same kind of a uncertainty. So there is a quite a good amount of computational efficiency we get through using this deviational formulation. Okay, so now we are coming to this linearized form. So that's the last concept we are going to discuss, and that's the equation we are going to implement in tomorrow's lecture as well. We will discuss the code. So we already discussed like why we need to go to the linearized form, and the reason was pretty clear, because if we don't go to linearized form, like whatever we have been doing so far, we need to calculate this T log. this local temperature or the pseudo temperature we need to calculate. And to calculate that, we need to know the information about all the particles. So let's say we had 10 to the power 6 particles. We need to know how much at certain time t, like let's say certain time t1, they are contributing all the particles, like how much at time t1 out of these, how many particles are there. So basically, like think of, if you think it in computer memory term, like all the particles you need to propagate, like you have to let them drift, let them like go to different cells simultaneously. Now think you have 10 to the power 6 particles. So it would take a humongous amount of space. If you want to go for more particles, then even more space. So you need to know the information of the all the particles at the same time instant to calculate this T local here through this pseudo energy form, like pseudo energy when we compare. So that's kind of a detrimental, like we have to find a certain way, like so that we could get rid of this T log from our equation. We could get rid of this T log somehow, then we don't need to know the information of all the particles at the same time. So what we could do, we could individually propagate at one particle at a time. And if we have a parallel computer, we could propagate, let's say 200 particles on different processors, and all these particles would go, they would scatter. So we would, in the end, we would collect all their statistics. So that's the point, this T-lock, this linearized formulation, that's why this came into picture, and it was introduced in another paper, so the reference number is not right here. So the reference, if you go to the paper, so the DOI of that paper is 10.1063.1.475767. So it is a paper in 2012, like where they talked about this linearization of this term. So basically, the linearization was done to get rid of T-lock so that we don't need to treat all the particles at the same time. We could treat them more like independently. Okay, so how do we go about it? So what we could do is we could think of it as like this E-lock minus E equilibrium T equilibrium. So if we say these two are fairly close to each other, like if they are not differing too much, E-lock and ET equilibrium. So basically the T-lock and T equilibrium are not so far different. So we could just make an approximation. We could do a linearization of this term. So we could write it as d by dt. So let's say if there are two terms, d by dt, that's what we have written at. But we would take this differentiation at t equilibrium. Then we have to multiply by. So we could think of it as treating it as delta E. And we have written here d by dt. So delta E over delta t. But so we have to multiply by delta t. So we could approximate it as a first derivative dt, but we would take that derivative at t equilibrium, and then the T log minus T equilibrium would come here. Okay, so we have approximated this E log minus this term like that. Okay, so what we can do now, as you could see, so the left hand side of this equation, we could write it as d omega p tau, all of this term remains same, and this tj also now we have made t equilibrium because we said already the difference is not too much, and this E log minus E equilibrium we write it as de by dt T log minus T equilibrium. So now when we have to draw the particle, we have to draw the particle from this distribution instead of this distribution, which needed the information of local temperature. This expression also need the information of T local. But if you remember, we were drawing particles from this like cumulative function we were making. So if you make a cumulative function, because this is like some prefactor A, B, or whatever, this would go away. This would cancel out. So ultimately, we are left with this equation d of omega by tau d by dt. So this type of term we are left with. And this term does not contain any local temperature. So now we could propagate all the particles one by one. Or if we have several processors, if we want to do parallel computing, then we could use different processors to propagate particles. basically one of the particle does not need to know about what other particle is doing. And in the end, we could collect all the statistics. Is this linearization procedure clear? Because that's the equation you are going to implement. That's the distribution you are going to use. So it's not a very trivial problem. So you have to be very confident in like understanding this part. Hemavati, is it clear? Yogesh?
Yes, sir.
So it's clear.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so basically what we essentially did, we made each computational bundle or each phonon bundle independent of each other. That was a quite a big jump, like in terms of computational efficiency now. Okay, so now how would this linearized algorithm work? Uh, of course, our equation remains same. It's just the distribution from where we draw the particle changes. So basically, the E log minus ET equilibrium we approximated by this term. So our distribution changes. So the algorithm is not going to change much what we did except this drawing from the distribution. So what we would do is, so we would, so let's talk it here. So we would draw the initial properties of the particle. So if you remember, if we assume some E and we have to take this, so we would draw some particles. We have to know its a sign. Is it a positive particle or a negative particle? We need to know its sign. We need to know where it would originate, the position of the particle. So let's say it's a one-dimensional object. Like we need to know whether it originates from here or here, like which position it needs to originate. We would have to know its frequency, like omega zero. Like this is position x0. Sign could be plus minus. So we need to know like let's say the particle is generated at this position x0. What is its frequency? So if you remember, we draw this, found out this frequency through cumulative distribution function. So we need to know its frequency as well. So we need to know then the direction, like what direction we are going to propagate in. And corresponding to this frequency, we need to know also the and direction, we need to know the group velocity as well. Okay, so all of these properties need to know. And if we are doing time dependent study, like which we do it in tomorrow's hands-on exercise, we need to also take the time t0, because the particle could emit so let's say we are simulating from 0 to 100 nanoseconds. So the particle could emit randomly at any time also. So let's say this is our time axis. So particle could emit any time. So that time also we need to draw like T0. If we're doing steady state simulation, we don't have to worry about that. Okay, so that was the first step, drawing the initial properties of the particle. So next step we would do, we would calculate when would the particle scatter. So if you remember, we had this equation 1 minus exponential of delta t over tau, the probability. So what we could do is that we could just rearrange. So we could bring 1 minus p equal to exponential of minus delta t over tau. So 1 minus p, we could assume some random variable r. And so we could take a logarithm of that. So if you take ln of r, that would become delta t over tau. You put a minus sign here. So delta t would become tau ln r. And this tau you already know from the input data, whatever the lifetime of phonon was. So then this way you could calculate after how long the phonon is going to scatter. So this delta t. So once you know after how long this phonon is going to scatter, so this was our second step, like finding the traveling time before the scattering would happen. So in the third step, what we would do, we would find out its new position. So again, the new position would be the old position plus some function v0, like group velocity times delta t. And this delta t comes from here. And we could find the new position. So now you could think there is some problem arising. Let's say this is our domain. like 2D domain. And let's say the particle was initially here, and now it was its x0 position. Now it started propagating, and after delta t, we are finding its position, like depending on the wave vector. Like say the x new position comes here. So we already know like this can't happen. The particle can't go out of the domain. So we have to bring the particle back here. So that first we have to calculate after how much time the particle would reach here. So from here to here, it took time delta t. And let's say this location is xb. So we could find how long it would take to reach from here. So that would be just xb minus x0. If you take a mod of that, and if you divide it by the velocity, you would get so new times, let's say delta t prime, it would take to reach from here to here, this boundary. And after it reaches the boundary, depending on how the boundary is, like maybe it's diffusive, maybe it's a specular or refractive. Let's say if it's diffusive, it could scatter in any of these directions. So basically, we would take care of this scattering event, the boundary scattering event, and then it would propagate for the remaining time, and then you would proceed accordingly. If there was no collision, let's say particle was here and it reached only here, then there is a no problem. So then we don't have to worry about all this procedure. So basically this fourth step was collision. We have to worry about this collision part, like how this collision would happen and how the scattering from boundary would happen, whether it is a specular condition or a diffuse scattering. Okay, so now the step comes. So let's say if there is a no collision with the boundary, so if let's say there is no collision with the boundary, so let's say particle is it was here at x0, it reached here at x new position is this, there was no collision with the boundary. So now the particle would go, because we've already found after delta t time, it would go its first scattering event. So it would, the particle now would scatter here. So once the particle is going through three phonon scattering, so we have to draw the new particle from new distribution. So that's why we found out our expression. So after scattering, like it would emit from d of omega p divided by tau de by dt, but this was t equilibrium and t equilibrium. So we could draw the particle from here, and we don't need to know about any other particle. From this distribution, we would draw the new particle. And of course, once we know the new particle, its polarization, frequency, and everything, it would start propagating. So the new particle would be generated here. Maybe it would start going in this direction. The only thing which doesn't change here is like once we have chosen this new particle, uh, so new velocity vector we would define, but the particle sign won't change because the epsilon effective, if you remember this epsilon d divisional energy effective we had defined initially, what each particle the energy it was carrying, that energy hasn't changed. So the sign of the particle, like this plus or minus sign, won't change. Okay, so once the particle is going through this, like we have to sample like how much a particle is contributing to the macroscopic properties. So as it's going from this place to this place, it's contributing to the temperature and heat flux to this domain, like what from where it is going. So we need to sample all of that contribution, like let's say within this cell, how much this particle has contributed to the temperature and flux. So this way it would keep propagating here and there, like and if the time let's say we final time, so we wanted to let's say kill at let's say 100 nanoseconds, if the final time has reached, we would say okay, the particle has been killed, or maybe it reaches the isothermal boundary, then also it would get absorbed in the isothermal boundary. So there are multiple ways to kill the particle. So these are the 6 steps like which you have to worry about. So basically drawing from the initial properties, and the second was calculating this delta t using minus tau times lnr. Third was finding its new position. So once we found its new position, we have to worry about this collision with the boundary, like if it's going to collide with the boundary. then we have to take care of that. If it's not colliding with the boundary, we have to draw the particle from the new distribution. From the new distribution, we have to draw the particle after 3 phonon scattering event. So that would be your 4b. Fifth step is like we have to sample its contribution, how much it contributes to temperature and flux. We have to sample this macroscopic properties. And sixth step is just to terminate the particle. So if the time is has crossed or something has happened or that it has been absorbed by isothermal boundary, we would terminate the particle completely. So is these steps clear? Like Yogesh and Hemavati?
Yes, sir.
So that's what has been described here. And again, as I said, you could read more in the paper. Like all these steps we have already covered. Okay, so next comes the part.
Sir, is that paper is from your group of?
No, it's not from my group, but we have actually written a complete code in 3 dimension. So tomorrow the
Okay.
code we are going to do is in 1D, but we have written a complete 3D code and it has several examples. Like I would make it available to you maybe in a month or so.
Okay, sir.
So in there you have a lot of example related to this non-Fourier heat transfer. But this theory was developed, as I said, like it was developed in 2012, like where this paper came out. And if you want to search for through DOIs, DOI number is one. Actually, it's written wrong here. So the DOI is this. But what we have done is we have completely implemented this algorithm like in full 3D from the scratch. And
Okay.
we have done several ballistic, quasi-ballistic examples. So our paper is going to come out soon, like, and then the code is we are going to make it available to everyone so that everybody could use this code. And we have like 6-7 examples to cover, like to practice from.
Okay, right, right.
Okay. Okay. So next step is like initial and boundary conditions like this. They would contribute to the deviational population, so they could be treated as a like a specialized source term. So if we denote the sum of all source terms like this boundary and initial condition by this q, some q, so it is dependent on position x, phonon frequency, omega, angle, capital omega, p and t, polarization and time. So how much, let's say, initial condition would contribute to this source term? So let's say if we have an initial condition and that initial temperature, let's say this is a 1D domain. And let's say initially it was at 330 Kelvin, the entire body. And so that was at T equal to T0. T equal to T0, it was 300. And then as soon as T equal to T0 plus some delta time, we applied some boundary conditions here. Like let's say we made it 310 and 290. So the particles now could emit from initial condition like 330 Kelvin also, or it could emit from the wall. And let's say equilibrium temperature we assume to be 300 Kelvin. So now we are trying to determine how much this initial condition of this 330 Kelvin in the domain is going to determine the source term. So let's say this temperature, as we said, like this is Ti of X, like it could be X dependent. Here we have chosen it to be constant. So let's say it's a Tix at T equal to 0. So the Q would be given by this 1 over 4 pi comes from the solid angle. D is density of state, then energy of deviational particle, and delta T. Delta T because this initial condition is only applicable at delta of T0. If we assume T0 to be equal to 0, it becomes just delta T. So the contribution to the source term becomes 1 over 4 pi d EID delta T. So if you look at it, so deviational particle we had written, if you remember, the EID we could write dE by dt and T equilibrium and equilibrium condition, and then Ti minus T equilibrium. So we could write this divisional particle like that. So that's what we have written, dE by dt. So dId, the dE by dt term, and then this temperature difference, Ti minus T equilibrium. Delta T remain as it is, and we define this 1 over 4 pi density of state dE by dt. This term is heat capacity. We haven't discussed this part because that's another set of lectures. But this term we could call it a heat capacity. So the overall function, the contribution to the source term becomes heat capacity of a particular phonon mode at of certain polarization, Ti minus T equilibrium delta T. So now you could substitute this into this here, and then you could get how much its contribution is going to be. Okay, same way, you could do it for the isothermal boundary condition. So isothermal boundary condition, the contribution towards the source term would be 1 over 4 pi again, the density of state, but here the deviational particle at the boundary. And the flux is given by this Vg times E, like there is a normal vector, like we have to take, and boundary is only at, let's say, delta boundary. So let's say if x equal to 0, we could write it as delta x. If it's at right boundary, x equal to L, we could write it delta of L. And then some heaviside function. So if you take a dot product, it becomes Vg cos theta, C of omega, like previously, Tb minus T equilibrium delta of x. Again, you could put it in this expression and you could get the expression for the flux. So that's how we get the contribution to the source term from, let's say, initial conditions or the boundary conditions. So then we have to sample the properties, like how we would sample the properties is now. So let's say this IGB is a macroscopic quantity of interest, and we are interest. So basically, let's say this is the domain. Now the phonon is propagated like T0 it started. Now we are at T prime. At T prime, we want to know how much contribution, like what is that if we have to sample, let's say, some macroscopic property like temperature or flux here, like what would be it? So this is a macroscopic property of interest, and but it depends on this microscopic variable. So whatever we are sampling this particle, so it depends on this microscopic property like G, which is a function of again x omega d omega in time. So then it would be 1 over 4 pi, this density of state G, and this deviational particle at T prime, and of course integration of all of it. Okay, so if we recall, like deviational simulation approximates this distribution EID, like using in the phase space using deviational particles. So this we could determine through, like, we know the particle's energy is epsilon effective, that we already know. The sign of the particle is SI. So this I bar G, like what we are trying to get, the estimate of IG. So I bar G is just the estimate of IG. We could get it like particle energy is epsilon effective sign, and whatever our macroscopic quantity is. So we have to sum over all such particles. So let's say we have to calculate heat flux in along x or z direction. So what we could do is, like, so our microscopic quantity, like, so this microscopic property becomes for heat flux Vg dot Ez, and this is some characteristic function xi r, like don't worry about, mu is the volume. So basically the essential quantities are Vz and Ez, like, so we could substitute this into our equation. We could substitute in this equation, like, to the z term, and we would get our estimate of the Ig prime, and from there we could get like this estimate would be like, that would tell us about the macroscopic property. So this is a pretty straightforward formulation, and tomorrow again when we do the code we would talk about it. So if we are going to the steady state problem, so of course no source has to be dependent on time. So we could do a ensemble averaging with time. So let's say we reached some steady state at time TSS, and we add some more time to it, and we integrate over all such times. So we would get the steady state estimate. So Ig tilde SS. So that would be equal to epsilon effective, like whatever this epsilon effective is, divided by this entire time duration after the steady state what we are doing, and this sum over SI and G, SIG integration of this TSS to TSS plus T. So let's say if we have to calculate, if you take a T infinity limit, if T goes to infinity, then you could write it as a like a effective deviational power from steady source, like epsilon dot effective could write. So that won't change much. So there's nothing much more on the slides. You could go over after the lectures, like what is on the slide. But this is all details are described in the paper also. So basically what we are doing again, we are sampling all the trajectories of the particles. And we have also assumed there is no source term in the system, which is a function of time. And we have taken this limit t tends to the infinity so that initial conditions effect vanishes. Because if let's say we choose initial condition to be 330 Kelvin and equilibrium temperature is 300, boundary is 300 to 90. So if we are in a steady state condition, the effect of this initial temperature has to vanish. So that's why we go to really, really long time if we are solving for the steady state solution. And particles, we have to sample over their entire trajectories from emission of the steady sources, like to termination. Okay, so let's say again we are looking at the heat flux in the z direction. So what we would do, like in the steady state, we know the power now. Whatever the sign of the particle, this Li is the algebraic length. So if this is our domain, particle is traveling like this. So what we would do, we would sum over all these algebraic length. So don't think of vector length, but the algebraic length, how the total particle has traveled in everywhere. So SI, we would sum over all segments, this SI Li for all particles and divided by the mu r volume, and we would get our steady state response. So this is, I think, pretty straightforward. Okay, I think that's it we wanted to cover. In the next class, we would talk about our algorithm, how we are going to implement. So this time, actually, I would share the code. So tomorrow when you come, I would show the code on here and you would code. So I would describe the code little bit. So you have to fill in some of the blanks so that you can get of understanding. And we are going to do it in Python. So I would explain it in Python. If you need, you could convert it to MATLAB or C++ or Fortran, whatever language you are comfortable with. So are there any questions at this point?
No, sir. Thank you, sir.
And also one thing to keep in mind, like today I would be sending out a survey, like for the class, like how much you have understood, and this is necessary for us to improve for the next time as well.
Yes,
And
sir.
so please take some time and fill out that survey like as soon as you can. So I would send an email, like so please take your time to fill out that survey.
Okay, sir.
Okay, in that case, we would stop here. And if you have any questions, please let me know. And that tomorrow, 10 to 1, we could discuss before the sum. If you have any questions, otherwise we would proceed with the code. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.